Can you guys think of a time when you tried really hard to fit in? I think we probably all can. For me, I think back to my senior year of high school, and there was a group that after Engage, we would all go over to Matt's house and we'd watch a show, and the show was called Big Brother. Anyone ever heard of or watched Big Brother? Okay, so I'm not going to explain it. I don't have enough time. But this show, it's a pretty good show, but this show comes on 3 times a week, 3 nights out of the week when it's on. And so if you're going to watch this show, like it's a full-time commitment. Like you're bought in, you're dedicating a lot of time to watch this show. And for this season, I decided that I was going to buy in and I was going to watch it and follow along and all that. Because I wanted to be a part of this group that went to Matt's house, right? Be very honest, I like the show. It's a good show, but it's not good enough to watch 3 times a week. But I did that because I wanted to be in this group. I wanted to fit in. I wanted to be in the know. I wanted to be invited over and hang out with these people. I wanted to fit in, and I wanted to be like everyone else in this certain situation. Have you ever done something because you wanted to fit in and you wanted to be like everyone else? Tonight, we're starting this new series called Different, and the purpose of this series is for us to talk about what it looks like to be different and live differently as Christians. Okay, so I don't think it's going to come as a surprise to anyone when I say that Christians are called to live differently than the world and the people around us. But what specifically does that look like for us and for our lives? How are we specifically supposed to look different? And what does that look like for our lives? Tonight, we're going to be specifically talking about refusing to conform. Okay, so refusing to do what everyone else is doing, refusing to follow the world, refusing to follow what we see around us. And I'm going to give you the bottom line up front at the very beginning before we get into it too much. The bottom line for tonight is that you have a choice to either obey God or to conform to the world. You have a choice to either obey God or conform to the world. That's the bottom line for tonight. This whole series, we're going to be in the book of Daniel. Tonight, we're going to be in Daniel chapter 1. So here's how Daniel chapter 1 starts. Verses 1 and 2 say this. During the 3rd year of King Jacob's reign in Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The Lord gave him victory over King Jehoiakim of Judah and permitted him to take some of the sacred objects from the temple of God. So Nebuchadnezzar took them back to the land of Babylonia and placed them in the treasure house of his God. And so what we see is that we have King Nebuchadnezzar, and he's the leader of Babylon. And King Nebuchadnezzar is a great leader. And what I mean by great is that he's very mighty, he's very powerful, he's very victorious. He's feared. Everyone else, the different countries and leaders fear King Nebuchadnezzar. And so he's great in terms of his success and his power and his might. And so he goes to Jerusalem and he defeats Jerusalem. Like he overtakes them, he overpowers them, he defeats them. And when he does this, he takes certain things back with him to Babylon, different important things. But one of the most important things that he takes with him back to Babylon is certain people. And he takes the most talented and the most useful people with him back to Babylon. And what he does is he takes them as captives. Okay, so he takes them, he forces them to go back to Babylon, which would have been a 500-mile long journey that they would have had to walk back to Babylon from Jerusalem where they were. And so now they're living as exiles, as prisoners in Babylon, in this completely new place, 500 miles away from home. And most of the rest of the book looks very closely at the life of Daniel and then 3 of his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. For the next 3 weeks, that's what we're going to look at, is different stories from their life as they're now living in this completely new place as captives, as exiles in Babylon. So let's keep going with the story. Verses 3 and 4 say, Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, his chief of staff, to bring to the palace some of the young men of Judah's royal family and other noble families who had been brought to Babylon as captives. Select only strong, healthy, and good-looking young men, he said. Make sure they are well-versed in every branch of learning, are gifted with knowledge and good judgment, and are suited to serve in the royal palace. Train these young men in the language and literature of Babylon. And so now, like I said, they're back in Babylon, and King Nebuchadnezzar, he only wants the best of the best. right? They brought these people back to Babylon, but King Nebuchadnezzar only wants the most elite. He only wants the best of the best. He wants the strongest. He wants the healthiest. He wants the best looking. He wants the ones also that have it together mentally, right? Like they're smart, they're intelligent. Long story short, King Nebuchadnezzar, he wants the people and the young men who have the most potential. He wants the ones that have the natural gifts, the things that you can't teach. And he wants this because what's he going to do? He's going to train these young men in the language and the literature of Babylon. My senior year of high school was a very easy year for me academically. I'd kind of taken most of the necessary credits that I needed up to my senior year, so I was able to take some more fun classes. And I joke with some people that my hardest class my senior year was actually ceramics. Okay, and it wasn't hard academically, like I got the A, but it was hard because I have no skill or giftings when it comes to anything like creative or art related. I'm really bad when it comes to those things. But in ceramics, what you would do is you'd go to class and you would get to pick out the clay that you wanted, and then it was up to you to create something really great out of that piece of clay. All right, so here's a couple things that I tried to create my senior year. Here's the first one. Pretty good, right? I think we can all see what this is. Okay, basketball court, not bad. Here's the next thing that I tried to create. I think they progressively get better, okay? So here's like a little monster. You can see someone's getting eaten by it. So not bad, right? Created this monster. Here's the one that I'm really, really proud of. Okay, here's my elephant that I created. Okay, like this big elephant. I think this was like my final project. But my ceramics teacher said that we couldn't put the elephant in the kiln because it was too big, and she said it might blow up or catch something on fire. And I told my ceramics teacher, I said, well, that's just a risk that we're going to have to take. And it never made it in the kiln, but that's okay. But I still have some bowls that I created at my parents' house that my mom uses, but I think she just uses them because she loves me, you know. But when it comes to ceramics, right, you're given this chunk of clay that can have great potential, but it's up to you to turn it into something great. And so here's the thing, King Nebuchadnezzar, he viewed these young men who would have been teenagers at the time, like you guys, he viewed them as an opportunity to form them and to mold them and to shape them into exactly who he wanted them to be. His goal was now to make them Babylonian people. Okay, he wanted to completely change and transform them into these Babylonian people who would walk like, talk like, think like, act like, believe like Babylonian people did. So let's keep reading in the story, starting in verse 5. It says this: the king assigned them a daily ration of food and wine from his own kitchens. They were to be trained for 3 years, and then they would enter the royal service. Daniel, Ananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were 4 of the young men chosen, all from the tribe of Judah. The chief of staff renamed them with these Babylonian names. Daniel was called Belteshazzar, Ananiah was called Shadrach, Mishael was called Meshach, and Azariah was called Abednego. But Daniel was determined not to defile himself by eating the food and wine given to them by the king. He asked the chief of staff for permission not to eat these unacceptable foods. Okay, so verse 5. Verse 5 says that they were to be trained for 3 years to prepare them to do the job that he wanted them to do inside of the royal service. And so over the course of the next 3 years, as they're there living in Babylon, the goal was to transform these young Jewish men into Babylonian men. And really what's happening is that the Babylonian teachers and leaders, they're basically going to brainwash them to become Babylonian people. Okay, they're going to force them, like I said, to act like, think like, believe like Babylonian people. New names, new customs, new beliefs, new ideas, new gods. But what's really interesting to me is that one of the primary ways that they try to do this, one of the primary ways that they try to transform them and change them into these type of people is through the education. Okay, so they train them in the language and literature. They educate them. They tell them what to believe, and they tell them how to think, because they knew that if they could get to their minds, then they could also get to their hearts, and they could get to the core of who they were as people. We see this throughout all of Scripture. Okay, we see this idea throughout all of Scripture. We see that what we believe, what we think about, what we focus on, what what we take in is ultimately shaping and molding and changing us into the people that we will become. It's impacting us and changing who we are. Romans 12:2. This is probably a more popular verse for a lot of us. It says, "Don't copy the behaviors and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person." How? By changing the way that you think. Then you will learn to know God's will, which is good and pleasing and perfect. Philippians 1:9-10 says, "I pray that your love will overflow more and more, and that you will keep on growing in knowledge and understanding. For I want you to understand what really matters, so that you may live pure and blameless lives until the day of Christ's return." Colossians 3:1-2. "Since you've been raised to new life with Christ, set your sights on the realities of heaven, where Christ sits in the place of honor at God's right hand. Think about the things of heaven, not the things of earth." And so don't try to tell me that what we watch and what we listen to and what we consume and what we take in are not having some type of impact on us. We see it clearly in all three of those verses. And so first and foremost, if you want to be different, all right, if you want to be different and live differently and not conform to the patterns and the ways of the world and do what everyone else is doing, then it starts by checking what you're actually consuming in your life. And so what are you consuming? Like, what are you watching? What are you looking at? What kind of videos and TikToks and Reels are you watching? As I was thinking about that, it's funny. If you were to look at my Instagram right now and just start scrolling, you would see mainly two things. Okay, here's the first thing that you would see. You'd see a lot of dogs. Okay, I have like a weird amount of dogs on my feed right now. They just like keep coming up. I keep scrolling. I think that I've started sending my wife at least one like dog reel or clip every single day. 2 months we'll probably have a dog. But there's a lot of dogs. Here's another picture of, these are just straight screenshots from my Instagram. Just a lot of dogs. The second thing that you would see if you're just scrolling on my Instagram is a lot of food. Okay, so there's a lot of like food and recipes and baking things, but that's kind of boring. And so here's another dog one. They're just so cute. But you would see a lot of dogs and food and a lot of sports stuff too. But like we know how social media works, right? We all know how social media works. The more it feeds you more of what you look at and what you focus on. And so we have to be careful about what we're thinking about. We have to be careful about what we're focusing on and what we're consuming, because like all three of those verses said, the things that we're taking in, the things that we're looking at and watching and consuming and thinking, those things are transforming and changing and molding us and molding our hearts into who we're going to become, into the people that we're going to become. And so we have to be careful about that. Okay, so they tried to change them into the people they wanted them to be with education, but what else? How else did they do it? Well, they completely changed their names, right? We read that in the text. They completely changed their names. And for us in the world we live in, names aren't like a super significant thing. Like some of you probably have names that mean something, but for a lot of you, it's your parents thought they were a cool name, right? Like mine is because it was an S and it was a boy name. Like there's not much meaning other than that. But back in this time, names were significant and they were important and they had meaning behind them. And so what Daniel's name meant is that God is my judge. Okay? And his new name, Belteshazzar, meant Bel, protect his life. Bel is a pagan god. Ananiah is the Lord shows grace. His name was changed to Shadrach, and Shadrach's name means under the command of a coup. Mishael is who is like God. Meshach is who is like a coup. Azariah, the Lord helps. Abednego, servant of Nego. All of those second names are all pagan gods that they would have worshipped. And so they've completely changed their names in an attempt to change their identities and to change their loyalties, right? They're trying to completely change the people that they are. And then, of course, another big attempt to change who these men are is by the things that they eat. All right, like that's a big part of this story, and as you keep reading in chapter 1, it continues to be a big part of this story. They try to feed them this great palace food, this nice food, for a lot of different reasons, but probably to make them think, maybe this whole thing isn't that bad. Right? Like this is good food. Maybe this whole thing isn't that bad. So here's the thing that I want us to understand and realize. This may seem really far off for us, right? Like you may be thinking, no one's kidnapping me. No one's taking me to a place far away. No one's trying to change my name and brainwashing me and all of these things. But I actually don't think that this is very far off from what we experience today. We too, as Christians, we live in a place, and when I say place, I just mean this world. We live in a place where we are surrounded by people and ideas and beliefs and convictions and values that are completely against and completely opposite of Christianity and what the Bible teaches. We live in a world that's going to try to tell you who you are. The world we live in wants to define you and tell you exactly who you are. It wants to tell you where your worth comes from. It wants to tell you where your value comes from. It wants to tell you when you're loved and how you're loved and when you're lovable. It wants to tell you how you're viewed as a person. And if your identity is not rooted in Jesus Christ, then this world will give you a different identity. It will tell you who you are. The world we live in is also telling you how to think, telling you what to think, telling you what to believe, what's important, what to value, what to celebrate. Every single time that you go to school, every time you open up your phone, every time you open up Instagram or social media or watch a TikTok or watch YouTube or watch a TV show or listen to music or watch a movie, whatever it is, every single time, the world is educating you and trying to tell you how to think and what to believe. And the battle is real, right? Like there is a battle going on for your mind and for your heart. And if you don't realize that there's a battle going on, then you're way behind. We got to get in the game. We have to realize what's going on. So the question is, what do we do? Right? Like, what do we do with all this? How do we respond to all this? I want to put up Daniel 1:8 again. It says, "But Daniel was determined not to defile himself by eating the food and wine given to them by the king. He asked the chief of staff for permission not to eat these unacceptable foods." So this word determined that we have highlighted, it's a bit hard to translate, and so if you were to read different versions, the NLT, NIV, ESV, whatever you read, it might have different words in there for what that word means. But the way this word is used, what it means is that Daniel has placed in his mind. He set his mind on this, to obey God, to not sin against God. And this situation, eating certain foods, right, it might not seem like a big deal to us, but this was a big deal for Daniel because meat was unclean for Jewish people to eat. And so Daniel believed that in his heart, he would be sinning against God by eating this food. And that's why it was such a big deal for him, and he refused it, and he went about different ways to get around that. But I like the NASB version of this verse. I think it explains it really well. It says, "But Daniel made up in his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or with the wine in which he drank." He made up in his mind. Right? He made the choice in his mind, in his heart, not to sin against God. And so when it comes to this idea of not conforming and living differently than the world and not following the ways of the world, here's the first thing that I want us to understand and recognize is that you have a choice. Okay, recognize that you have a choice. All of us have a choice. All of us have an option. We can either follow God and obey God, or we can follow the world and conform to the ways of the world. Like we have a choice. All of you have the choice that you have to make for yourself and for your life. Are you going to follow God and are you going to obey God? Or are you going to follow the world and do what everyone else is doing and do what the world says to do? And I know this is hard because, let's be honest, a lot of times it doesn't feel like we have a choice. Right? A lot of times it doesn't feel like we have the option because it feels like, well, in order to be accepted or to be liked or to be included, then I have to do what everyone else is doing. To be loved or to be in my friend group, I have to do what everyone else is doing. I can't imagine how Daniel felt in this moment. Right? Think back to his situation. He's taken from his home, taken to a completely different place. Now he's surrounded by completely new people. And he's being forced to live in a different way and do things that are not the way that he wants them to do. He's surrounded by people that are not just living differently from him, but people that are encouraging him to do that and to go in that direction. Everyone around him is just following suit. They're doing what they're told. They probably also felt like they had no choice, but I'm sure Daniel, he had this inner struggle where he thought, what do I do? What do I do in this situation? I'm sure he was faced with the temptation to just do what everyone else was doing and to fit in and to not make waves or to stick out. He was in a culture that did not honor God, surrounded by people that did not honor God, yet he still made the decision to honor God. And for us, the choice is ours as well. Like it's up to us. We have the choice. We have the option. And again, I know it's easy to think, well, I'm on this team and they all do this, so I have to do this. I have to be like this. I have to talk like this. I have to watch this. I have to look at this. You don't have to. Right? You have the option. You have the choice to be different, to stick out, to stand up for what you believe in. And I believe that God has placed a lot of us in situations, in circumstances, in groups to be different, to be that light, to be the one that doesn't do what everyone else is doing, and to stick out. And so my question for you is, what are you tempted to do to fit in and to be like everyone else? Like what is that one thing that you are tempted to do to fit in and be like everyone else? And I'm going to say this, and then we'll move on, but I think you need to hear this, and so take a picture, write it down, whatever it is. But you will never regret making a decision that will honor God, no matter how much it might hurt you in the here and now. You will never regret making a decision that will honor God. You will never regret a decision in obedience to God, no matter how much it might hurt you in the here and in the now. Here's the second thing that I want us to talk about. It's that we're called to live as temporary residents. Okay? I know this is a weird term, weird idea, but we're called to live as temporary residents. The reality is we live in the world. I don't think that's a shock to anyone, right? Like we live in the world, but we are called not to be like the world. We are in the world, but we are not of the world. Philippians 1:27 says, "Above all, you must live as citizens of heaven, conducting yourselves in a manner worthy of the good news about Christ." And so we are citizens of heaven, but we're living here in this world, but really we should be living like temporary residents because we don't belong here. We are in the world, but we're not of the world, and that should be very clear to other people, right? Like when you are somewhere where you don't belong, it's very clear and obvious to other people that you don't belong in that place. My senior year of high school, I went to an IU versus Purdue basketball game, and it was at Purdue. And I'm walking into that arena, I've got my IU sweatshirt on, I've got my candy stripes on, like I'm ready to go, I've got my red and white on. And at my seat, I'm obviously sitting in a sea of just black and gold, right? All Purdue fans. There are not a lot of IU fans. And so if you look at me, you can clearly see that I do not belong here and I do not belong with these people, right? And that's just the reality of the situation. When you are somewhere that you don't belong, people will see. People will notice. It is clear and it's obvious. And so my question is, does your life look like you belong to the world, or does it look like you belong somewhere else? All right, if we're fitting in and we're doing all the things that everyone else is doing, we're missing the point of this. Here's the last thing quickly, is that we have to realize that God is in control. Okay, and this point really, you can't read the book of Daniel, and especially chapter 1, but as we continue in this series, we're going to look at more familiar stories from the book of Daniel. You can't read the book of Daniel and not see that the overarching theme of the book is that God is in control. Okay, especially here in this first chapter, it's all over. And if you were to read the whole chapter, which I would encourage you to do that tonight or this week, at some point this week, read the first chapter of Daniel in one sitting, and you'll see this theme that God is in control. Okay, verse 2, it says, "The Lord gave him victory over King Jehoiakim." Verse 9, "Now God had given the chief of staff both respect and affection for Daniel." Verse 15, and again, we didn't read all of this, but verse 15, "At the end of the 10 days, Daniel and his 3 friends looked healthier and better nourished than the other young men." So what happened was Daniel rejected the food, and he went to the chief of staff, and he said, "I don't want the steak and the wine, just give me some vegetables and some water. Test me after 10 days and see how I compare to the other people." So he eats vegetables and drinks water for the next 10 days, and he's actually stronger and better and well-nourished than the people that ate the steak and the wine. That's not a coincidence, right? Like God is in that situation, and he's working. Verse 17, God gave these 4 young men an unusual aptitude of understanding every aspect of literature and wisdom. And so again, without getting in the details of what happened, God gave these 4 young men these special abilities to find favor with the people there. So really the point that I'm trying to make is God is in control of this entire narrative, of this entire story. He's really the main character of the book of Daniel. He's in complete control, and the truth that we have to understand and believe is that God is in control of our life too. Right? Like, God is in control of your life. No matter how it feels, no matter how it looks, no matter what's going on, God is in control of everything that's going on. And so when it comes to this idea of not conforming and living for God and obeying Him and being bold and living out your faith and not doing what everyone else is doing, like, if we can just be honest, there's some fear there. Right? Like, there's some fear and there's some worry there. What's going to happen if I don't do this? Or what's going to happen if I do this? How are people going to view me? How are people going to respond? What is my life going to look like if I don't do this, or if I do this? We don't have to worry about the what ifs. Or like, we don't have to worry about the next step, about what might happen. We're called to be faithful and to be obedient to God. Right? We're called to follow Him and to choose Him and to go after Him. We don't have to worry about the next steps, because we know, like we see in Daniel chapter 1, that God is in control of it all. God is in control of every situation. Matthew 6:33 talks about this, and really it tells us the thing that we need to worry about. Matthew 6:33 says, above all else, seek the kingdom of God. Just seek after God. Follow Him, pursue Him, chase after Him, and then it gives us the promise that if we do that, He's going to take care of our needs. So we don't have to worry about the next steps or the what ifs. We can just worry about making sure that we are pursuing and chasing after God with everything that we are. Here's the bottom line for tonight. Like I said at the beginning, you have the choice to obey God or conform to the world. So what's it going to be? What's it going to be for you in your life? What kind of life are you going to live? I want you to decide tonight. Right? Like, decide right now what your life is going to look like. Are you going to obey God? Or are you going to follow the ways of the world? It's your choice. Right? You have a choice, but remember, you will never regret any decision that you make in obedience to God, no matter how much it might hurt you in the here and in the now.